Can I ask one more question?
Um, yeah. Okay, so I told it to start recording. It looks like it must be.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I was just asking, if people had questions about the assignment. So, Elijah, you have a question?
Yeah, so just when we're submitting, you can't attach anything, I don't think. But Adam, did you copy and paste your pictures in there?
So I was just talking about this before. Where it was just there's something where it's not letting you upload a PDF to that
Uh,
discussion board. So I wound up just there was an option underneath that, also in that export drop down, that said like export as JPEGs, and it just made a bunch of files, and I just pretty much just added embed using that embed image button.
oh, okay.
Okay. Oh, so I didn't see that. So you put a bunch of JPEGs up in the
Yeah.
post? Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, well, that's fine. I'll take a look at that. You should be able to like attach PDFs, but it is possible to exclude certain file types, and sometimes that's handy. Is like, if you want lightweight, web-friendly images like JPEGs, and people put 6,000 by 4,000 pixel PSD files with like 20 layers, that's like 60 megabytes or something like that. It can be pretty obnoxious. So sometimes it's good to be able to limit the file types that people upload so you don't get things like that. But I wasn't aware of anything like that. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, when we get off here, I'll check those settings. I'll make a note of that. Yeah, I mean, there are different ways you want to be able to present things. Like in an online environment, JPEGs are great, and in a lot of situations, I prefer having JPEGs where you can just like, a lot of sites, like in Canvas, if it's a JPEG, you can just click on it and see it. Other file types, sometimes you have to download them and open them in a particular program, things like that. But PDFs are pretty universally, supported, and it's a good way to deal with, multiple images, packaging them together like that. So, I'll check to see, make sure that you can do that. Any other questions about the assignment? Before I started recording, I addressed the question of, what you're supposed to do for the final versus, the exercise. And, basically, I was saying that, in the exercise, I give you, 5 very specific things to do. And in the final, you use all this techniques and all the work you did creating selections for different parts of the image, and then thinking of creatively what you can do with that. That's your image instead of like just a bunch of things I'm telling you to do. Okay, so in the forum where you're submitting images, like I went in and demonstrated a couple techniques with a couple of them where there are things that I saw where there were specific techniques that might be useful. And so I don't know if you've seen those things. I could do a little bit of performance, photo editing here. If there are, things in your images that you're having trouble working with or looking for some help with. I have Adam's exercise here. I was just looking at it. I could show that, and kind of talk about some things with it. Let me see. Wonder if I can share that screen. Let me take a look here. Yeah, let me try. I'm not sure what you're saying. Are you seeing my Adam's PDF file?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So so Adam, this is your original cropped image?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
usually
I
on
can
this.
tell because there's that blemish on my face still. It's not the
Oh yeah,
clean.
yeah. You retouched that out, right? So you have a simplified background, which you make some things easier. Yeah, it's a pretty clean image to start with, and when you crop things, of course, the first thing I think about is like how it's cropped, the composition that you end up with. I don't know if you use like the rule of thirds or whatnot when you're.
I used one of the grids. I forget which one worked better.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it looks like in terms of rule of thirds is like you're kind of like a third of the way over here, and then you have this open space over here. One thing in terms of portraits is that the direction you're facing is often psychologically important. You're on the right side of the screen and you're looking off that direction. Typically in a portrait, you have the person looking more towards the center of the frame. This looks fine actually, but just as a general rule, you usually don't put someone towards the edge of the screen and have them look off screen. One of the professors at the university here, I remember him talking about it once, and it's kind of like, having someone in the corner of the room kind of talking into the corner. Whereas if they face the center, it's kind of opens up more. So just a general comment there. If I go to your cleaned up one, okay, this is much brighter. I like the brightness and contrast that you added here. You did remove that, blemish from your face. Okay.
The beard line is a lot tight. It's a little better.
What was that?
The beard, like, they're just, I guess it's not as obvious. I guess you're probably, I don't know, whatever zoom level you are, but there's a lot of like stray hairs on my cheek that I took out, and
okay.
I have a little scar on my forehead from chicken pox when I was a kid. That got taken out.
Okay. Yeah, people have kind of different philosophies about things you take out and leave in, and it's like if it's something that is distinctive that well, I mean, one idea is temporary things versus permanent things. Like if you in the picture you have like acne, and it's like you don't always have acne. It's just happened to be there the day you took the picture. It makes a lot of sense to remove that because it's a temporary thing that doesn't have to be preserved. Some people, you think that like scars being more permanent would be something you would keep. Where was your scar?
It's so funny because it's so obvious to me when I'm, I think in your demo, you did a lot of making sure you were at 100%. And I think that I overdid the zooming in because some of these things that probably were not a big deal, I probably spent a little too much time on. It's on my forehead, but at
Okay.
the resolution we're looking at this, I can't see it.
Is it the light spot?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
it's just lighter.
Yeah. Okay. Um, it, you know, it, it's not like someone who knew you would look at the photo and say, "Oh, where's the scar on his forehead?" It's like, so I mean, that's fine. But yeah, so this is a nice cleaned up one. You started with a pretty clean image to begin with, so that's fine. So this is just the grayscale, and this is the high contrast. I mean, just the gray one already looks fairly high contrast, but your cleaned up image is kind of contrasty. Okay. All right. So, but that's fine. This is kind of more exaggerated contrast, and this is your colorized. Okay. So your sweatshirt is black, right?
Yes.
So you made it a little blue. That's so
yeah, like an navy.
Yeah, it's like, so Kamar, in your photo, you have like the blocks of colors on your clothes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's, I looked at it and said, oh, well, I wonder if, he's going to use the same colors when he colorizes it or he switches it up. That's, one thing with the colorizing, you can change your hair color, you can change your eye color, you can, do all these sorts of things. So it's interesting to see what choices people make. Now, the one thing here, I mean, it's fairly simple. Your skin tone.
Yeah, I really struggled with the skin tone. I watched your video, and I just was not the balance between the red and the blue and the green. I just was having a hard time. And when I boosted the red, especially since it was attached to the beard, it just started looking ridiculous.
Okay.
So I just tried to kind of not push it too far, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a universal thing. I mean, whatever your race or ethnicity is, like skin tones, there's more red than green, more green than blue. If there's I mean, the red comes from the hemoglobin, the blood. If you don't have enough red, then well, I mean, if you're too green, you just look sick, right? If you're too blue, you look like dead. So you always want more red than green than blue, but you want to have some variation in hue. Like here, one reason I have you start with the color photograph is that, well, you have a reference there that shows you what you really look like. What skin tones are really like. So here you have more red on your forehead and kind of more yellower cheeks and things like that. And then, of course, did you do a color layer? Like the one where
I didn't for this one. I didn't.
Okay.
It was just my face was just with curves.
Okay. Because it can be hard to get all the color variation that you really want in skin tone just with curves. If depending on the color temperature of the light, like if you're indoors and you have an incandescent light, which is kind of yellow, then putting more yellow in the brighter areas, by taking blue out of the brighter areas, can recreate some of that same thing. But there's some variation in color that's just based on you've been out in the sun and you're more tan in certain areas, things like that. And for that, using a color layer to colorize and then brushing in things, a little rouge on the cheeks, a little lipstick, that sort of thing. So anyway, so this looks good. Since you turned it in, I wanted to talk about it, just to talk about things, the principles in general, in case that helps other people who are finishing up here. It looks like in Photoshop, I actually still have your photograph open. I did that little demo about warping the image. Let me see. Where's my shares? Share screen. Okay, wait a minute. Stop share. Let me share Photoshop. So I mean, since I have your photo open, I hope you don't mind if I mess with your face.
In any other context, I would.
Okay. Yeah, so here, I was kind of demoing how you could like warp the image to make these edges straighter, stuff like that. But in terms of what we were just talking about with the colorized layer, does everyone understand how that works?
Yeah.
Let me rearrange my disk here. Okay, well, I just made you grayscale. I'm not going to adjust those things. One thing, actually, let me turn that off for a second. I did want to kind of talk about this. I was kind of fascinated about whether you would try not cropping, but editing this shadow here. And I don't know how successful I could be doing that. For one thing, because there's the shadow, the texture will be different because you don't have the same illumination. But if I wanted to try to fix that, my approach would be to try to select the shadow and change its values independently. Now there's like the magic wand tool and the quick selection tool. We're going to be working. Oh, that really jumped out there. We're going to be working more with these. I talk about selections being like 90% of everything we do in Photoshop, but there are different selection tools, and each assignment is going to be dealing with creating selections. And so this is an iterative process where, I ask you to create selections here. The next week there's going to be an exercise creating selections of things, based on edges or color, different things like that. And then the assignment after that, the photo montage, again, we're going to be doing similar things. So I don't expect you to like know how to create selections of everything like immediately. Each lesson we're going to be working more with these things. So like with the quick selection tool, I'm going to try selecting some of this. And it kind of jumped out here and said, okay, I'm selecting the whole thing. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key to subtract stuff out here. And it's kind of like, went too far. So I'm going to go back. It's basically like teaching it what parts you want, what parts you don't want. So, by holding on the Alt key and drawing out here, I'm saying, okay, I don't want this stuff. then drawing in here normally, saying, I do want that. If I want to try to tell it, I don't want these lighter areas, but I do want these areas, it slowly kind of gets to know what I want. And there's some ways of refining this. Okay. So it's not going to be perfect here. I know that there's going to be messy stuff around the edges, but I'm figuring I could go and edit the edges later. So with this selection, I'm going to go in, I could do brightness and contrast. I could do curves. Basically, there are at least 5 different ways of adjusting the brightness and contrast of things in Photoshop. And we've got the brightness and contrast adjustment layer. That's clearly one way where you can adjust the brightness of things, lower the contrast. Ooh, this is so much that I'd have to use the legacy where I can kind of go beyond that. And I could try to, mix up, a level which matches. But I'm saying the problem I talked about might be a problem is that in the shadow here, because it was all black, you don't have this texture that's part of it. So, I could get, the brightness and contrast to match, but I still wouldn't have that texture. But you may have noticed that, like, one of the features of the healing brush is copying texture. So I'm actually gonna accept this, and I don't expect to be successful with this, but try a couple things. Now, because I want to edit this with the adjustment applied, I don't want to, I basically want to apply this adjustment. So I don't want this to be a separate layer where I can go and edit the image underneath. I actually want to change the pixels of the layer rather than just having an adjustment floating here like this. So to do that, I am going to do, let me select the brightness. Let me select both those layers and then do Control E. And it basically took the adjustment and it applied it to the image. So the pixels are actually changed now. When you do an adjustment layer, you have the image, and then above it, you have an adjustment which changes the brightness and contrast, but you're not actually changing the pixels of the layers underneath. By collapsing that, I've actually changed this background layer now. And sometimes you need to do that depending on what you're doing, although it's usually good to save a copy of the layer so there's no real destruction going on. So, I've kind of got the brightness and contrast here, but if I wanted to get this texture, I could actually use the healing brush and or content aware fill. It's basically the same technology. There's a cloning tool where you just copy pixels from one place to another, but the spot healing brush, the healing brush, content aware fill, these are all based on a technology where it looks at different frequencies of information. And by that, if you look at the sweatshirt here, like the shading here is kind of changes more slowly. The frequency of change, of the shading is kind of gradual, but then the texture here is high frequency information where it's changing, very quickly in a small area. And, the healing brush and whatnot, they try to preserve the shading. So it's like on your face, you copy, oops, I lost it. Okay. You're copying, what you're trying to do is copy the texture, like your skin texture from one area to another area, but it adjusts, the shading so that it doesn't, stick out. Now I could try a couple of these tools here. I could try, a really, I could try to do it all in one fell swoop by selecting the whole thing and doing a content aware fill, where it's going to fill that selected area based on areas around it. Oh, and yeah, they changed the way this works. Let me see how this does. Well, not bad. And if you look at the image on the right, it's looked around to see what was around that, and it copied stuff from out here to fill that in. Now, this interface I'm looking at right now, it is kind of a new way they do this, where you can go in and you make adjustments to like the area it's looking at to copy from, which is out here, and you can exclude things. Let me try to zoom out a little bit. Like if it was filling your sweatshirt with stuff like from your face or the wall, I could go in here and I could tell it, no, don't use this stuff out here. I don't want any of this stuff as part of the texture that's being filled. And doing that, you're not seeing any change over here because it wasn't using any of that stuff anyway. It actually did a good job just looking at similar textures, colors from your sweatshirt. So there's probably something I've lost here, like, your arm doesn't look very distinct here. Deselect. But actually that did a remarkably good job just for like, you used to have to really work hard at doing this sort of thing, like using the healing brush and selecting, okay, I want to copy some of this over here to over there. But now, that was pretty much an automatic thing, which is, I'm actually surprised it worked that well. So, but this technology is something that you're seeing used more and more in different parts of Photoshop. At first, it is the healing brush and the spot healing brush, which you probably use to remove the blemish. Then the content aware fill uses the same technology. There's the patch healing. Well, I don't know, what's it called? The patch tool, where instead of using a brush, you're using a selection. So there's those two major things. Is like you can create a selection and apply it using the patch tool or the content aware fill, or you can use the brush-based version where you're kind of pointing and drawing where you want changes to happen. Okay, so let me zoom in here. How are we doing on time? Make sure I have. Okay. Yeah, when it did that content aware fill, it actually put that on a separate layer, so you can and you still have the original underneath, and you could maybe put some transparency on there or something. Let me see if I can. Yeah, you're complaining about the hair and whatnot. Not next week, but the week after that, there's a lesson in there that's specifically about doing hair selections, kind of like working, practicing, creating that kind of a selection. I just want to try to do a real quick thing here, because I just want to talk about the colorizing a little bit. All right, so I've mostly got skin selected. Okay. If we display the black and white, and then I went into curves, I could, add the red. I have to get the curves above the black and white so we can actually see what's going on here. Oh, yeah, I'm making your skin darker. All right. There we go. So there's the red. So we were talking about this. Then, yeah, that's pink and plasticky, so we go into the blue. And you maybe take more blue out of the highlights so there's more of a yellow light in the scene. But then I usually use the green channel to create the variation, like maybe take some green out of the shadows, so maybe the shadows are more magenta, and put more green in the highlights, so the highlights are more yellow. But there's a limit to what you can do with all this. Then I can go to the where I'm working with all of them together to just create, work with the contrast here. But once you get something, and we have a lot of magenta going here, which I suppose I should go into the blue and take out some of that. At some point, you have to go ahead and actually, work with brushes and apply things a little more specifically. One reason I started developing this technique is that with a lot of colorizing, sometimes you want to be able to do some things kind of automated, like when Ted Turner's TBS, they bought all these old black and white movies, like the whole catalog from, I think it was Sony or Columbia. I don't know. They bought all these old black and white movies, and the idea was people didn't want to watch black and white movies, so they decided to colorize all these movies. And if you think of a movie, it's like 24 images per second. You have to kind of automate things. So if you can, you create a color scheme like curves and apply that like frame by frame, you can get a lot of work done in a more automated way. And so this is kind of looking at, one way to do that sort of thing. Okay, so with this, so I'm going to leave the curves alone here. I've got the mask here, which I created. And I'm going to manipulate this a little bit. If I go into channels, here's the mask. If I turn off the RGB, this is the mask I made. It's black and white. But a mask is a channel, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about more and more is like, we have a red, green, and blue channel. Each of these channels has 256 shades of red, green, and blue. Now we have this mask, which also is a channel, which means there are 256 levels of being transparent or opaque. But it's basically a grayscale image, and so I can paint on that. Now I can show it overlaid, or I can turn it off. But I just want to show that if I take a brush, I could go in here. I'm going to make it bigger. I'm not going to do anything real detailed. But if I want to kind of mask out some of this, like I'm at like 29%. Now you can do this more subtly, but I just want to make this more dramatic, so it's faster. Here I'm basically removing this beard from the mask, or making it transparent, so that, because this mask is what the curves is applied to. So if I go in here, I can take stuff out of the mask, soften the edges. If I made a really soft brush, I could do, kind of blend from one thing to another.
I'm sorry, could you
Yeah.
show where I must have missed something in how you got to this point? I understand that you have the mask, but I see under layers you have the curves selected. What are you actually painting on? I'm just a little confused as to what.
Okay. The adjustments, are just the settings for the curves and whatnot.
Right.
But the mask here says what part of the image, like the curves, is being applied to. So this is a mask here. With the black and white one, it's all white, which means that the entire image is
Okay, that's just the curve.
Converted.
Gotcha.
But I could do that if I went to the black and white and started going over here. I'm editing the mask so that this part is not being converted to black and white. I could go in here and add.
It's because you're painting black.
I'm painting black, right?
Onto the mask. Okay, that's what I missed. That's what I didn't get. Okay.
And that's a good point, is that when you're painting on a channel, you can't use color because it's a grayscale image. So if I click on the background, notice that my foreground color is red. But if I click on the mask, it switches to black and white because it's a black and white color space. So for instance, like on the curves here, I see that there's some yellow showing through here, so I could go and paint that out, because my selection for the mask for the curves was affecting that area, and I just went and removed that. And if I go back to the channels and look at it, you can see what I've been painting. This is a grayscale image. I can paint on it. Like if I don't want this edge here, I could just go, and this is a way of cleaning up some of your masks. If there's like a fringe, you can just go in and paint that. And I have a soft brush, so as I'm painting, I'm also softening that transition as I go along. So there's that. Now, if I want to create more color variation, this is where you can go and create a layer, set this to colorize, and basically colorize whatever I paint on this layer. It's going to take the hue and saturation of what I paint and change what's underneath to that hue and saturation. So if you have a grayscale image, you have luminance. The light and dark aspect is there. We're not changing the brightness of the pixels. We're only changing the hue and saturation. So with that selected, right now I have red. So if I wanted to put a big red spot there, I could go in and do that. But if I want to do something a little more subtle, one thing I could change the opacity of my brush. We're going to be talking about brushes more later. But if I just want to redden up your lips, I have a brush where I'm just using a 9% opacity here. So I'm just very lightly adding some red to this colorized layer. So I'm changing the hue and saturation of your lips just a little bit. The whites of your eyes should not have that kind of color. So if I switch to black, black has no saturation at all. Make my brush smaller here. So if I went in here, I don't like this behavior. And I'm going to actually increase the opacity here so I can make a change more quickly. I'm taking the color out of the whites of your eyes so that it's more natural. I could make the brush bigger and decrease the opacity of the brush. So if I just want to take a little saturation out of areas, well, that's 3%. Yeah, that's very light. I could back off, this color a little bit. Let's say, you just want to kind of blend in some gray, or, it doesn't make any sense here, but you could do that. If I wanted to make a more yellow color, like on your phone, ooh, that's bright. Yeah, a little bit goes a long way with these color adjustments. Yeah, so you could get more color variation just like adding a little rouge to your cheeks, as I say, or like, painting on a little lipstick. Bringing the saturation out of the whites of your eyes so that they're white. If you're smiling, I don't know if any of you are smiling. I don't remember anyone smiling. One thing people often do with teeth is they just make them gray, which doesn't look good either. Teeth usually have a little bit of yellow, kind of ivory to them. So those are just a few ideas as you go along here. You were kind of getting towards the end of the hour. For some of the class meetings, I'll have specific lectures about particular ideas. This is just trying to, give some pointers and answer questions that people have. So as we're getting to the end here, I want to kind of throw out there if people have any questions. Anything that I was demonstrating brought up some questions.
I don't think so. I want to try some of this, but I just need to try it.
Yeah, well, there's there are a lot of techniques, and every image presents different problems, and so for everyone's photograph, there different things that kind of come up, which is why I did a couple demos in the forum with like a few of the images. I did something with Sarah's background, and I did something with Adam's background, and I thought I did another. Oh, yeah, with Lindy's background, she Adam has this wall, so there's perspective lines here, and if you're like cloning, actually let me do it. So if I was cloning here, and let me select actual image here, and I said I want to clone from up here, and I want to go down here and clone. Yeah, the perspective is different. My source and my destination have different perspectives. So there's a tool called Vanishing Point, and I did a little demo of this with Lindy's image. If it's something that would be useful for yours, is where you can actually do the cloning, and it actually changes the perspective, where I can clone from up here and I copy it down here, but with the perspective correction applied to it. So if any of you have stuff like that in your images, you could take a look at that. Well, that's all I had. Looking forward to seeing what people come up with. I will go into Canvas and see why PDFs aren't uploading. And I just want to say again that a lot of the things we're doing, there's going to be a lot of repetition here. It's like over the next few weeks, we're going to just be practicing more and more ways of selecting things and manipulating things, and it's a cumulative kind of process. So learn what you can this week, and the next week you'll be able to use that and apply more. All right, unless anyone has anything else, I'm good.
Are you gonna collect our Photoshop files?
When I was kind of rearranging things in Canvas, I usually, I often do collect the Photoshop files. We'll have the PDF showing, the 5 versions. I'm mostly interested in, for the final, seeing the finished result. But if I see kind of problems in your final assignment, it's often useful for me to be able to go in and look at the layers and stuff to see why things are, kind of messed up or whatever. But I don't know, maybe make that optional. I'm glad to look at anyone's Photoshop file, but submitting the JPEG to the forum, I like, because then as you're going through and looking at everyone else's images, all you have to do is click on them and they open up, and you can quickly see what they did and give feedback to the JPEG. Having the Photoshop file is more useful if trying to deconstruct, or give different kind of constructive feedback. Yeah, maybe I'll put in the instructions. You could upload, put up the JPEG and put up the Photoshop file, and then people could just click on the JPEG. And then if I want to look at the Photoshop file, it's also there. I think in the past for the Photoshop file, I've used Dropbox, and people would just put their files in there. Because it's a lot more convenient with bigger files, just have them magically appear on your computer rather than downloading them one at a time. But I don't know. I'll take a look at that. The requirement is, the JPEG in the form, and I don't know if people do Dropbox anymore. Is that still a thing?
I think so.
Yeah. I know that, in the past, I've shared a Dropbox for people, and actually, in the next assignment, I always had people just, I'm going to have you submit images to a collective folder where you could all use, pull from the same library of images to create this multi-layered collage. And in the past, I've always used a shared Dropbox folder where everyone could just throw them in there, and then everyone would have the images to work with. It's probably still the easiest way to do that. So I'll probably create a Dropbox folder for that, but I might go ahead and just, I don't know, for this assignment, everyone doesn't need to see your Photoshop file. So, I'll think about that. Okay. Well, have a good night. Look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Good night.
Thanks.
Yeah.
man.